Literally, the day after I suggested that Wes Streeting might be cracking under the criticism he's receiving over his deadly puberty blocker ban, The Independent published an article in which the UK Health Secretary attempted to save face by apologising for some of the harm he's caused. Clearly not because he's grown a conscience and intends to do the right thing, but because trans children rushing him on stage, dragging him over the fact that he's knowingly torturing them, isn't a great look for his brand as a corporate hand puppet. Yet I just wanted to unpack exactly what it is he said and why this should be taken as evidence that the actions of groups such as Trans Kids Deserve Better are working. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, child abuse, medical violence, and sexual violence. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so that we can keep the channel running. We cannot survive without your support. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about Wes Streeting's apology, what it extended to, what it left out, and how he has continued to sell bold-faced lies to the British public as he destroys the NHS. Today's story comes from an Independent article headlined "Streeting Genuinely Sorry for Fear and Anxiety Caused by Puberty Blocker Ban." It discusses how another event Streeting attended, the Unison National Healthcare Service Group Conference in Liverpool, was protested not by TKDB, as far as I'm aware, but other trans-supportive and pro-NHS campaigners. They held up Labour campaign banners which had promised to save the NHS, alongside placards displaying the trans flag, whilst calling out the pseudoscientific CAS review. One of the protesters was also wearing a shirt calling out Labour support for the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people by European invaders who have taken to collectively calling themselves Israel. The Labour government has helped Israel cover up its atrocities, including the murder of doctors, paramedics, and other aid workers in Gaza. So, a lot of important issues across the board, which is great. I love it when different activist groups come together to support one another, as we are much stronger together. But moving on to Streeting's apology, the article stated, quote, "Speaking of the ban, Streeting said the decision was solely about the clinical advice that he was given, adding, 'I did what I think any health secretary should do when they are confronted with that sort of choice, which is to seek the advice of clinicians and to ask clinical experts and leaders what we should do in that case.' I am very conscious that for lots of people, not just in the trans community, but across the LGBT community, in fact, across wide society, there is a real anxiety about the decision that I took. I would challenge anyone in my shoes to say, as a politician, that you would overrule clinical advice, especially when it comes to medicines that are challenged on the basis of whether they are safe or not for children. I know people disagree with that decision, I know it's caused real fear and anxiety in our community, and that certainly doesn't sit easy with me. Mr. Streeting said clinical trials will build evidence and take the political poison out of what should always be a considered, compassionate and evidence-based conversation about how we provide care and support to a vulnerable group of children and young people in our society and trans adults. He added, "I totally get why, having taken this particular decision so soon, why it's caused that fear and anxiety. And I'm genuinely sorry about that. And I have met many, not just trans organisations, but families and children and young people who strongly disagree with this decision and are fearful as a result of those decisions. And that breaks my heart. It genuinely does. What I hope you will see through our actions, not just our words, over the course of this parliament, that this will be a Labour government that cuts waiting times for trans people, that improves access to services for trans people of all ages in our health services, that clamps down on hate crime and attacks against trans people, that introduces new laws and protections, including a ban on conversion therapy and a trans-inclusive ban on conversion therapy." End quote. So there's a lot to unpack here, especially regarding the claims of clinical support, the apology itself, as well as Streeting letting on to why he's suddenly apologising, even if only in a very limited capacity. Starting with the empirical claims, the notion that Streeting stood by the science when he extended the Tories' temporary ban before making it permanent, this relates to the Cass Review, a non-peer-reviewed report that has been discredited so many times by the global scientific community that it's not even funny anymore. The amount of power given to this objective piece of trash is a scandal akin to the Andrew Wakefield vaccine scandal, which famously forged a fraudulent link between child vaccines and autism, supercharging the modern anti-vaxxer movement. Both papers have had a very real cost in the harm they cause children, some of whom have had their lives taken from them as a result. To give a few highlights that I noticed upon my review, Dr. Hilary Cass, author of the Cass Review, straight up lied about her own methodology. Cass claimed to be using a system known as GRADE to rate said evidence as low, moderate, and high quality. She then asserted that since she could find no high quality evidence, namely double-blind randomized controlled trials, do keep that in mind, that there was only quote-unquote scant evidence to support the use of puberty blockers. The problem is, she found an absolute wealth of both low and moderate quality studies, practically all of which supported their use. This is important since, as is explicitly stated as part of the grade rating system by the creators themselves, quote, although higher quality evidence is more likely to be associated with strong recommendations than lower quality evidence, a particular level of quality does not imply a particular strength of recommendation. Sometimes low or even very low quality evidence can lead to a strong recommendation. End quote. So she just straight up lied about her own methodology in order to fabricate the narrative that there was scant evidence, knowing full well that the majority of people wouldn't bother to check her work or the systems she claimed to use. What's worse, however, is the fact that she revealed just how much of a hack she is. For you see, it's clinically impossible to run double-blind RCTs on puberty blockers, a fact we've known for more than 20 years. The reason being that the medications themselves are known to work, at least chemically. That's not what these trials are testing. They're testing the psychological impact and potential physiological complications said medications have. This is a problem since, if a child is placed on a placebo, they will begin to see changes in their body as puberty takes place, making it impossible to maintain said placebo. This is why a 2001 study on the psychological impact of puberty blockers in children suffering precocious or early onset puberty quite literally fell apart and had to change its focus. The children receiving a placebo realized they were on a placebo and dropped out of the study to seek said medical care from a different source as their mental health deteriorated. You cannot run a double-blind on puberty blockers, not for cis children suffering precocious puberty, not for trans children, a fact Hilary Cass would have known had she done elementary research on the subject, suggesting that either A, she didn't do said basic research, or B, did and chose to lie about it. Fact is, she sang praises of another review, which she herself labelled, quote, an update, end quote, to her own breakdown of the evidence regarding puberty blockers for her report. That review found 50 papers, 24 of which were found to be of low quality and were thus ignored, with 25 being marked as moderate quality and 1 being marked as high quality. So, did Hilary Cass make use of said 26 studies? Of course not. She completely ignored them. And in case you're like me and are wondering if it had anything to do with that high quality study, that maybe it contradicts the vast wealth of other studies that support puberty blockers, said study found that, quote, transgender adolescents show poorer psychological well-being before treatment, but show similar or better psychological functioning compared with cisgender peers from the general population after the start of specialized transgender care, involving puberty suppression." End quote. Emphasis added by me. Again, Hilary Cass completely ignores said study in spite of it being a high-quality study by her own admission. Which brings us to Hilary Cass's undeclared bias and conflict of interest. For whilst Cass has taken to presenting herself as an objective authority who came into things without prejudice, her colleagues called her out on this, noting that she had a history of pushing anti-trans propaganda onto her peers, most notably Abigail Shrier's Irreversible Damage. Irreversible Damage is a gender-critical propaganda piece that presents all trans men as weak-minded girls who have been duped into believing that they are trans, part of a social contagion narrative grounded in the myth of rapid onset gender dysphoria. This is part of a fascist ideology that views said girls as a sexual resource that must be guarded from a Jewish cabal that is supposedly carrying out said indoctrination in an effort to reduce white fertility, bringing about the Great Replacement. That is the ideological nature of the piece Hilary Cass was caught promoting. So she was already set against the trans community, specifically trans youth, before she was selected for her position. This needs to be kept in mind, especially in light of the fact that a Freedom of Information request revealed that only one person was ever considered for the post, that being Hilary Cass. This is in spite of the fact that, contrary to what Streeting asserted throughout his apology, Cass is not a clinical expert of either child endocrinology or transgender care. She has no expertise in this field at all and was seemingly selected for her anti-trans stance alone. This tracks with a post made to Twitter by the current leader of the Conservative Party, then acting Minister for Women and Equalities, Kemi Badenoch, in which she openly boasted about the way she and her government filled key positions with anti-trans bigots since they knew Hilary Cass's review wouldn't stand actual scientific scrutiny. Once they'd filled the gallery with anti-trans zealots, this allowed them to hire Hilary Cass, again a non-professional in the relevant fields, as a medical hitman. Cass was then rewarded for unleashing such horrific violence upon the trans community with peerage, making her a permanent member of the House of Lords, in large part thanks to Badenoch, revealing a horrific conflict of interest. Cass had every reason to lie. This is what Streeting is choosing to present to the public as sound clinical advice by a clinical expert. He does so to pretend that he's some sort of slave to the evidence, when in reality, all of these things were known before he made the ban permanent, meaning ignorance was no excuse. To make things even worse, the Cass review didn't even suggest that blockers should be banned. At least it didn't, until the document was sneakily edited in December, just as the ban was made permanent. This came after numerous human rights groups pointed out the absence of any such proposal in the original paper. It also bears mentioning that Streeting's own consultation on whether to make the ban permanent overwhelmingly rejected the proposal. In spite of Streeting inviting known hate groups, only 27% of respondents supported the ban, with 59% opposing it. Taking a look at researchers, the people who are supposed to be the most up-to-date on the information out there, only a single person supported the ban, that person most likely being Hilary Cass. And it's important to discuss all this in detail in order to stop Streeting from getting away with the lie that he was acting on the science. He wasn't, not at any point throughout the entire process. He chose to make said ban permanent purely because it aligns with his personal beliefs with regards to trans children. We recently did a video about the fact that Streeting has thrown his full support behind the Bayswater support group made up of abusive parents. And when I say abusive, I mean One parent admitted to denying their child access to support at a rape crisis center after they'd been assaulted purely because said center was gender affirming. Meanwhile, another member, someone on the group's committee this time, boasted about the fact that their child left their home and now lives in an LGBT+ refuge for abuse survivors, which they mockingly declared a, quote, church for the gender faithful, end quote. And while Streeting can claim to have not known this during the 2024 elections, all of this information had been made publicly available by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism months before Streeting invited said group to partake in the aforementioned consultation. Streeting knows about the abuse the Bayswater group inflicts on their children, including the denial of support and counselling for a child victim of rape, yet he still supports them and their efforts to torture their children into being cisgender. Which leads us on to Streeting's claims that he supports a trans-inclusive ban on conversion therapy, more accurately described as conversion torture or gender identity conversion efforts. This is just another lie, not merely because of his support for the abuse targeted at trans children by the parents of the Bayswater group, but because of his policies and their impact. When Streeting asserts that he banned puberty blockers because they are challenged on the basis of whether they're safe or not for children, that is a blatant lie, and he knows this. How can I say that? Well, because those exact same medications are still being prescribed to cisgender children suffering psychological distress due to early onset puberty, like mentioned earlier. Because they're known to be safe. Said medications have been prescribed since the 70s and have gone through decades of clinical testing. They are not experimental. It's only when those very same medications are used to save trans children that they're called into question because Streeting and his supporters would rather trans children are killed in an attempt to turn them cisgender than allow trans children to live and thrive as who they are. He is quite literally engaged in conversion torture of trans youth on a national scale, forcing them to go through the wrong puberty, engaging in what amounts to legal, medical, and psychological violence. Streeting knew that 16 trans youth had been forced to take their own lives following an earlier, now overturned ban on puberty blockers, a fact he's tried to help the Tories, the opposing party, cover up. To make things even worse, doctors have come forward since Streeting made the current ban permanent, alerting us to the fact that trans children have begun starving themselves in a desperate last-ditch attempt to stave off puberty. These facts have been raised in public and they've been brought to Streeting's attention, yet he has opted to ignore them, just as he has outright refused to meet with Trans Kids Deserve Better, a group of trans children forced to take up protesting. Which is not to say Streeting has done nothing, as revealed to us by the Good Law Project on the 10th of April. Turns out that, just the day before, the NHS issued notice telling doctors that they're forbidden from offering any sort of trans-related healthcare for minors, including monitoring a child's hormone levels, something which is essential for the safe use of puberty blockers and HRT. This means that children who secure puberty blockers or HRT from a source other than the NHS are now to be denied monitoring and further care. The NHS claimed that this was due to said medications being unregulated, which is true for some online sellers, but not medications purchased from health services in France, Spain, Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, or any of the other numerous countries that still rightfully prescribe puberty blockers to trans youth. Fact is, it shouldn't matter if the medications are regulated or not. A doctor still has a duty to care for their patient and should still try to make them as safe as possible. As pointed out by Joe Morum, founder of the Good Law Project, a doctor still has a duty to help a heroin addict, and rightfully so, yet are now forbidden from helping trans children monitor their endocrine system. That's how much Wes Streeting wants trans children to suffer, that he deny them monitoring services that objectively make them safer because they refuse to let him force them to go for the wrong puberty. So his assertions mean absolutely nothing in light of his actions. He is lying about the supposed dangers of puberty blockers, and he is lying about his desire to protect trans children. If he is to truly hold those responsible for gender identity conversion efforts accountable, then the first person to stand trial for such crimes is himself. Without that, it's all empty words, a torturer promising their victim freedom from pain as they take another finger. Twisted and cruel. Which just leads us to discuss why I still take this apology, as fucking hollow and dishonest as it is, to be a good sign. As mentioned at the start, I published a video discussing trans kids deserve better and the most recent political action, a video that went out on the 8th of April and contained the following. This is particularly true of Wes Streeting. Streeting has separated himself from his community via the blood of trans children. If you are a gay man and an ally to the trans community, I am giving you this one objective. Make sure Wes Streeting knows that he is not welcome anywhere that flies the rainbow flag. I don't care if it's Pride, a gay-owned business, or even a damn hookup app. I need you to hold him accountable in a way that trans children cannot because of the wall he's built around himself, to do all you can to make him feel a fraction of the isolation he has forced upon trans youth. He can make peace with the community once he reverses the harm he has done, resigns, and gets a job outside the public eye. But until then, treat him with the exact same contempt that you would an anti-gay preacher. Fact is, I think this is already starting to happen. I think Streeting is beginning to realise just how hated he's made himself within the LGBT+ community. Which brings us to a little thing that happened on Instagram just the other day. It's at this point that the interaction began to be shared on Reddit, Blue Sky, and even Facebook, with people pointing out that A, when Streeting says new gender identity clinics to support trans people, he actually means gender identity conversion clinics intended to torture trans people into being cis, and B, that this is not the way a public official, least of all the Health Secretary for the UK government, should be talking to a member of the public they serve. I find it difficult to even imagine most Tory party members doing this, so for Streeting to lash out like this suggests to me that all the criticism he's been receiving is working, that it's hitting a nerve and making his life miserable. Which is excellent. Never underestimate the power of making politicians absolutely miserable as they continue to hurt marginalized people. This whole thing reminds me of when people in the US began harassing politicians in restaurants during the first Trump administration, and that is the sort of energy I want to see here in the UK right now. No justice, no peace. It might seem petty to some, but you'll be surprised by just how far petty can take you. So, to see The Independent publish an article the very next day with the headline, Streeting genuinely sorry for fear and anxiety caused by puberty blocker ban, caught my eye immediately. As a general rule, a politician will never apologise unless they feel it's absolutely necessary to save their brand image. This is especially true of neoliberals such as Wes Streeting, who like adopting this visage of power and control. It's why they spend so much time learning how to power pose or doing photo shoots in front of George Orwell slogans, presenting themselves as a hard realist, just telling it how it is. An apology, meanwhile, even a bad one, comes across as a sign of weakness. So, if Streeting feels the need to apologise in any capacity, that to me is something worth talking about, along with debunking the lies he's still trying to sell the British public. One particular line that grabbed my attention was his remark that, "I am very conscious that for lots of people, not just in the trans community, but across the LGBT community, in fact, across wide society, there is a real anxiety about the decision that I took." This seems to support my hypothesis that Streeting was already finding himself ostracized from the wider LGBT+ community, and that it's getting to him. So to all the lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, making sure he feels some iota of what he's forcing trans youth to suffer, my hat is off to you. Though, again, this is not a genuine apology. It's Streeting attempting to save face after all the criticism he's rightfully received. I mean, he can't even bring himself to admit what he's done. You either apologize in full acceptance of your actions, or your apology is just a lie. What Wes Streeting is saying here is just a variant of "I'm sorry if you took offense," which isn't an apology, it's an accusation. That noted, I still need to get this information out there to as many people as possible, whilst also debunking his assertions, even if it means I have to be a bit clickbaity at times. I mean, technically, Wes Streeting has apologised over some of the harm caused by his ban, a ban which, as we demonstrated multiple times on this channel, is deadly for some trans children. The title is therefore technically correct, even if the implication is slightly off, something easily fixed by adding an additional tagline, saying such as "does nothing to fix it," noting that there's more context that needs to be unpacked. Hopefully you can understand my reasons for making that decision. I just need wider society to understand that, when Streeting claims to have followed the science, he is flat out lying to you. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the apology? Have you seen any more signs that Streeting is getting desperate? How can we further escalate things to increase said pressure? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita, and Levi, take care now.